And welcome again to Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr, joined by Juan Zarate, our national security analyst. Juan, good to see you once again.
Bob, great to see you.
Taliban peace talks. We waited a long time for some serious initiative to take hold. Is this it?
Well, we've been waiting for 18 months. There were prospects of talks long ago. The U.S. had been hoping for talks, all with the theory that you cannot end the violence in Afghanistan. You can't see stability until there's a political solution. And the Taliban is a political player in addition to being a militant and terrorist force. And so this is the first sort of signal that that is back on the table, that talks with the Taliban are on the table. The problem here, Bob, is that President Karzai has now disavowed this process, feels excluded because the United States has said they would meet with the Taliban first, and then the Taliban could meet with the Afghan government. And so there's a bit of messiness here in terms of the diplomacy, but clearly the administration is trying to signal that they're willing to talk and that they're willing to seek a political solution as we face the drawdown in 2014.
If Karzai feels like he's on the sidelines and he's not participating, it seems like a non-starter. Why doesn't the United States make a better effort or maybe a stronger effort to bring him to the table and say, look, if we're going to make a deal, it's got to be a three-way deal here?
I think absolutely in concept that's right, and that's what should have happened. It's not clear to me that it didn't happen. You never know. President Karzai, in some cases, can be mercurial. There are internal political dynamics at play, so I'm not quite sure what's happening. But at a minimum, there was a breakdown of communication here because the Afghan government and the Karzai government, which has to survive beyond 2014, has to live with the Taliban, has to live with any agreement, has to be at the center of this. I think one of the concerns that he's had is that the constant preconditions that we had, even dating back to the Bush era. Keep in mind the Bush administration had in mind these kinds of talks as well. But there were preconditions. One, you have to lay down your arms. Two, you have to reject an alliance with al-Qaeda and give that up, meaning you're not going to be a global terrorist, part of the global terrorist network. And third, you've got to submit to the Afghan constitution and political process. And you can't be some militant group that's outside the process. Those preconditions seem to have kind of faded a bit. And I think that's what Karzai is also pointing to, that he's worried that those preconditions, in particular the last one about the political dimension, has been lost as the political office in Qatar for the Taliban opens and as the U.S. signals willingness to
Even
talk.
if the Taliban were to agree to those kinds of conditions, the disavowing of al-Qaeda, the laying down of arms, adherence to the Afghan rule of law, how is that enforceable? Going forward, how do we even know they would abide by that?
Well, I mean, we'd have to see with their actions. As with all this, I think it would be a matter of being able to sort of verify. But this is why the Karzai administration and the Afghan government's concerned, because they're the ones who are ultimately going to have to fight. They just took over all the security forces around the country with NATO support still, but they're now in charge. And so they're going to have to continue to fight the Taliban as these negotiations unfold. And there's a real sense of cynicism here that the Taliban is really playing for the post-2014 transition. They're setting up for their power play, and they're just trying to bide their time and trying to assuage the Americans and trying to set themselves up.
Well, and I think what's in it for the Taliban to agree to this if in the end they're just, put under the thumb of President Karzai?
Well, I think they're vying for as much political power as possible and a degree of legitimacy. I think it's important to note they've opened an office, a political office now in Doha, in Qatar,
right,
in the Gulf. That gives them a lot of legitimacy. And if the U.S. is legitimating it, that means, you can go have meetings there with them. They can fundraise. They can do all sorts of lobbying around the region. And so this gives them a sense of legitimacy and power that then amplifies what they can do in Afghanistan post-2014. This is why Karzai is worried. He's worried about the dynamics and the dynamics getting away from him and the U.S.
It almost sounds like two Afghanistans, to be honest with you.
Well, it's an Afghanistan that is going to have lots of challenges post-2014 when we're out in full force, and it's one that has fractures embedded deeply in it, tribal and otherwise. The Taliban is a key part of that, and they may foment it, and they may seek greater power for themselves. I think that's more likely than not, and I think this diplomacy is part of setting up their power play.
We've got to wrap, but any chance this can succeed? What are the hopes here on the talks?
Well, I think the hopes are that you get some moderation of the Taliban, that perhaps you do get a split amongst the Taliban, a group that actually does want to moderate, that does want to be part of a post-2014 Afghanistan. And the more militant parts can be isolated, killed, put aside. that's the hope. We'll see what happens.
All right, we got to leave it there. Juan, thanks as
Thank you,
always,
Bob.
and thanks to you for watching Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. We'll see you next time.